And thank you for all of your interesting questions to Joanna. So now we're going to hear another one of our contributor talks, and this time we've got Hannah Gibbs, a researcher at UCL, and I shall let her introduce the subject matter, and the floor is yours. And thank you again, Joanna.
Thank you. Hi, I hope you can all hear me. I've got a bit of a husky voice, and I've had a lot of people helping me contribute towards this, a lot of my colleagues internationally, so I've got a lot of notes on my computer, so I make sure I say everything that everyone wants me to say. But I'm very excited to hear all of your thoughts afterwards, because as you can see, I'm kind of asking a question rather than telling you something. So if anyone has any ideas, I'm bringing together ideas from human-computer interaction studies, geography, anthropology, archaeology, and other bits of computer science. So really keen to hear your thoughts. And yes, thanks for introducing me. My name's Hannah. I'm based at UCL, and I'm technically based in geography and archaeology. Let me see if I can move on. And oh, no, sorry. I think... There we go, that's the right way. So firstly, you can see kind of in the background here is a photograph from one of the places where I work in the Maya region. So that's the Guatemalan and Belizean border. So a lot of the ideas that I'm going to be bringing towards you today are from my colleagues where we work there. And the main angle that I'm talking you through this research is this idea of anti-colonial research. So where we're sort of systematically trying to destructure these processes which continue to disenfranchise people, built on the ideas that come from European and colonialism and imperialism. So one of the people who talks really eloquently about this in terms of cultural heritage is Wilson. There's also various other people who talk really eloquently about the idea that research can no longer be Indigenous people can't participate in research. They need to be leading and co-creating research. So hopefully you'll agree with me. In some context, this might be a good idea. Let me move on now as well. So while Indigenous people are not a monolith, I'm going to broadly use the idea that Indigenous people are a group of people or a community of people who are connected distinctly to an area of land which they use, occupy, or have been disenfranchised from. As you can see here, Indigenous people make up a huge proportion of the small proportion of the global population, but a large proportion of the extreme poor. They safeguard about 80% of the world's biodiversity, so they really rely and are intimately connected to landscapes, but they often lack formal recognition over these spaces. So the idea that they can and should be able to participate in recording landscapes is really keenly tied to their ability to live independently in a world which is not set up for them, unfortunately. They tend to be threatened by human rights abuses as well, which is intimately connected to the way they want to use their land. And also anthropogenic climate change tends to be a really big, impactful thing for lots of us, but it perpetuates these ideas that Indigenous people are excluded from the world. So hopefully you can see that recording what I'm going to describe as Indigenous cultural landscapes is really useful. I'm using the idea that my colleagues and I came up with about cultural landscapes because lots of Indigenous people, particularly, and you'll see some maps of the other people that I work with in 23 different countries, we come up with this idea that cultural landscapes exist because of the way that people perceive landscapes to be composed of animate, so that's people, ancestors, animals, spirit beings, but also inanimate things. So that might be the landscapes that you physically see when you think about as a geographer. And these landscapes become a really core component of how people identify in these spaces and how they choose to identify with themselves and their interrelationships, but also how they choose to identify against other communities. They kind of, and again, I'm broadly speaking about Indigenous people, they become part of this this holistic world where everything is interconnected. And so it combines tangible and intangible heritage and natural heritage. A couple of the people also who wanted me to talk about this, they talk about how changes in access to these cultural landscapes impacts their mobility, not just in terms of the physical way they can move through the world, but the way that they get to participate in socioeconomic circles. So this photograph that you can kind of see in the background is from an area where there's a huge, massive amounts of change, obviously because of international borders, but also because of the way that rivers change and pollution is impacting people. I'm going to tell you a bit now about landscape recording in these areas. I've already briefly touched on how Indigenous people through colonisation have been disenfranchised from and lost their rights to these landscapes and how they're managed and how they're recorded. But what I also want to describe a little bit briefly is how we have these ideas that cultural heritage is defined. And in the global north, it's very different to how it's defined in the global south. And also, even within the global south, it's also massively different. One of the key things that you might have heard of comes from UNESCO. So those are the outstanding universal values. And they are the key ways in which Indigenous people tend to be disarticulated and disconnected from how landscapes are recorded. Archaeology and geography in particular have played a role in colonial endeavours which have extracted resources and returned few benefits to these source communities. So it's something which few people in my discipline have spoken about for a long time, and also few people in your disciplines might have spoken about for a long time. But it's something that I and my colleagues think is really important to expressly say. So it might seem clear to you that the cultural significance of a landscape should be really centred to how these spaces are recorded, but unfortunately, this is not always the case. So one of the key ways in which Indigenous landscapes can be constructed in these ways is by using an Indigenous approach, and I hope you can sort of read how we're defining Indigenous approaches here, that they're defined by the Indigenous community, that they emphasise multiple public values, and that they draw upon multiple and varied forms of knowledge. As cultural landscapes are kind of made up of these interrelationships, having Indigenous people participate in how they are described and how they're recorded is really key. And it's a much more nuanced way of being able to describe the multifaceted and multi-layered ways that this might exist. There's a quote here that I have from one of my colleagues in Belize that I want to describe to you, where he says, "Mapped places are made of countless material, non-material, animate, inanimate, human and non-human things that have colours, emotions and effects, and are entangled with our experiences, memories and our embodied selves, which are impossible to show on a single map." So the key way that I want to introduce this idea of innovative technology is that people who may not necessarily conceptualize the world from a top-down bird's eye viewpoint on these paper maps that we're all used to seeing might be able to articulate it in a different way. So there's this technology, it's called Sapelli. It's actually 3 tools, and I'll describe them in a bit more detail in a minute. But they're essentially mobile data platforms that support people of any literacy level or any cultural background. So that might be people who cannot read, cannot write, or can't use digital technology, or from any kind of cultural background where they have different ways of understanding maps or different ways of visualizing landscapes, can use, and you can see here, this is someone in the Congo, this is a Bayaka person, using a smartphone to be able to record the geographic information about places. The idea is that Sapelli is co-designed with people, so it's situated within not just being researched, but also being developed with people in their communities as they use it, and the communities lead decision-making. I will describe to you the 3, they're all open source, by the way. So you can see first here, this top one is called Sapelli Designer. This one is web-based, so that's how you actually input the project into an app that already exists. So you come up with a conversation with people about the kind of things they want to record, and you can see some of the images here. Someone wanted to record a specific tree, someone wanted to record the presence of a gorilla. Then once we've built it with a community, we'll then go out and using Sapelli Collector on an image on your smartphone or your mobile device, you'll then be able to select the icon that you want to indicate the geographic location of. And then using the third one, which is called Sapelli Viewer, you'll then be able to see, based on the kind of imagery that people choose. Some people like satellite imagery, some people like maps, some people like hand-drawn things. Whatever the community wants to do, you then are locating these icons on the screen. And you can see also here, these icons are hand-drawn. Some people like photographs, some people like to hand-draw them themselves, some people like more photorealistic combinations of things. We'll show you next here. Oh. Yes, there you go. These are some of the projects that we've had people producing, and I know that you may not be able to see all the icons now, so if anyone does want to see this, just send me an email and I'll send it to you. But you can see that lots of people choose, I might be able to use this actually. No, for a technological person, this hasn't worked out very well for me, unfortunately, but you should be able to see there's a great discrepancy in the kinds of icons that people want to use. So some of them are very, very detailed. Some of them have text, for example, or some of them are much more green-based. And then we also have people who've got images of things. For example, this one here where you see there's a person in purple in a canoe, that's in the Pantanal in Brazil, and they just wanted to record the location of crabs or no crabs. So all kinds of different things people want to record. And the reason that I want to talk to you about this is because I think it might potentially be an innovative way of doing it, because it's
based on participatory design. It's kind of designed and developed as a piece of technology with communities and is part of this approach to establish a participatory scientific process. So in our co-design methodology, you can see here, we have this circular process whereby we have meetings and discussions, then we gain free and prior informed consent with the community, we design these icons, we evaluate the icons, we produce a community protocol which describes how the data might be used, what might happen to it in the future, who might use it, then we collect the data, then we analyse and visualise it, and then we might have to go back and have more meetings and more discussions. We kind of see the community as the key people who lead this, so we try to respond to instances where there's community need. And along with responding to instances where there's community need, we also communicate with the community how they've wanted to do this. So this example here comes from my work on the Belize and Guatemalan border, and this is how my community members want to describe how we do things. So it's a bit different to the one you see that I just described, which is a circle. They see it much more linear. So they see that they requested communication with a scientist, we had an open discussion, then we produced this free and prior informed consent process, then we did this participatory design, then they used the tools, and then I produced long-term support for them. But they've now gone on to be doing something else. So it's not a circle that I'm involved in anymore. They've gone and done it, and that's it. And then I've ended up there. I've got some more detailed examples here for you because, there we are. I've got some more detailed examples here for you because I kind of want to be able to describe not just what people are doing, but the reasons why they're doing this. Because I'm asking the idea that if this technology can more accurately, quote unquote, record these landscapes. So I'll read these out to you because I know you won't be able to read them yourself. Going from the top green one at the top in Ghana, we have a community who are recording weather indicators. So they're using natural resources to record weather indicators and combine it with satellite imagery. They wanted to do that because they were farmers and they felt like they weren't accurately getting weather indicators from the actual satellites. So they wanted to be able to share their ecological indicators, which is things like when ants move when they sense rain's coming. Then in Cameroon, there's an anti-poaching and wildlife monitoring among the Baka and Nzembe Fang communities. The second one in Cameroon is recording indigenous territories. So that's Baka, you saw an image of someone, the hunter-gatherer. The next one that's yellow is in the Central African Republic. People want to record, the Bayaka and Sanga people want to record resources in order to protect them from loggers. Then in the green one, in Ethiopia, agro-pastoralists are trying to record water sources in order to preserve food security. The next one in India is the Nayaka people, who are also hunter-gatherers. They're working with the local community and an NGO to record human-forest relationships, where there's 3 different groups there. Then in the blue one, it's in Cambodia, where the Kai and Khmer communities are recording and monitoring illegal logging. In Kenya, it's sustainable agriculture with Kenyan small farmers. Then there's further one south in Kenya is the Maasai, who want to record botanical knowledge. Then in the Republic of Congo, again, it's the Bayaka hunter-gatherers who want to record how forests can be managed. 2 ones at the bottom in the yellow are also recording logging rights. So that's Bayaka and hunter-gatherers and the Baka hunter-gatherers who want to record their logging rights against these big international organisations who come in and produce logging infrastructure. In Zambia, people wanted to record actually the location of Chikanda orchids, which is really interesting. And then the yellow one is the Republic of the Congo. People want to record wildlife conflicts. So they want to record things like damage by elephants to their water sources. Then we've got 2 in Namibia, where the Johansa Rangers and the Johansa communities want to record the locations of damage by cattle. And they want to record the health of wildlife when there's been damage by cattle to water sources. Then the last one in Africa is in Nigeria, where people want to, smallholder farmers want to record collaborative climate change approaches. Then in Brazil, the yellow one, the Guarani and Kaurani community want to map change in access to the water sources. Then we've got the Pantanal, which is the one I mentioned, where people want to record the location of crabs or no crabs. And the top one, people want to record the location of their territories. And the last one in the Amazon is where people want to map the invasion of their territories by external community members. The idea is now, hopefully, that you might be able to integrate all these ideas into one thing for me, is that whether or not this can produce something which is more accurate because it better integrates and more widely integrates a variety of different ideas and viewpoints, We know that everyone in the world has different values and belief systems, and hopefully I've been able to illustrate to you the diversity of the people that are using this technology. It's not necessarily for me to say that something is more accurate or not, but when we're talking about anti-colonial or decolonial processes, Moreton Robertson is a really interesting person from Northwest Australia who talks about how foreign expert, quote unquote, recording of landscapes effectively maintains colonial violence. So we're not maintaining colonial violence, perhaps that's a slightly more accurate way of seeing the world. And then Coulthard is someone who is from Canada, an Indigenous person from Canada, who talks about how anti-colonial science doesn't assume access to Indigenous land for non-Indigenous goals. And hopefully these community-led projects that are based on co-design can identify a variety of different data categories. I just don't know if the inclusion of more data categories makes recording more accurate. So I'm very interested to hear what you think. Thank you.
Hannah, thank you very much for that. Really interesting. Do we have any questions from the audience? I'll start if that's okay. I mean, for what I took away from this, it seems that these communities are sort of what a map means to them and how they use it is just in a completely different way to sort of how we, you and I, may use a map here. Is that, do you think, the biggest difference? That sort of, I don't know, if I use Google Maps, it's because I'm going from A to B and it's solely for that. Whilst for these communities, it seems the mapping is more for their sort of actually achieving or monitoring something which we don't typically use in our everyday. Okay, maybe we have our weather maps and stuff, but is that sort of the difference between them?
I think that's a really good point. I also should say I work in Euston to help people record pollution levels, and I work in East London to help people record knife crime. So a lot of the things I'm talking about maybe are people actively wanting to record something, whereas we maybe aren't actively wanting to record it. But there are lots of different ways that we do inactively record things when we just produce our favorite locations on a Google map, or when we send our location to our friends by sending like this kind of data when you send a photograph. We kind of map our cultural landscapes in that same way. So it might be that what you're describing is really, really accurate because people have a different conception of maps than we do. We're much more used to seeing the world from a bird's eye viewpoint. Lots of people don't see the world like that, they don't understand it. And we also have a map in our pocket all the time, and we're used to recording these things. That probably is the biggest difference.
Mm-hmm. And I think you highlighted the point there, sort of when you take a photo on your phone, it would appear and you sort of look on your photos and it shows this map. And it's really similar to what's being done there, but it's just a different way of thinking of when someone says to us, map, and what we think of. So, yeah. We have a question at the front.
Hello. I'll wait for you to receive a microphone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. I think I'm doing this very quickly because I'm trying to gather my thoughts. It's a lot to process. I am a student of conservation, but I'm also a web designer and coder.
Perfect.
So I understand a lot of what you're trying to do with this. I was just thinking about what you said about accuracy and how can you improve it. And in my work, what I see a lot with people and trying to tell a story or gather information to tell a story is there is a problem of giving them too much to record or too much to change or too much. It makes things worse. So I would say if you keep things simple, I think it's great the way that you're doing it already, and to be careful that someone with a lot of ideas could come in and make it more complicated, and then you can't use the data anymore. And I find that there's a lot of that because technology goes faster than what we can really digest ourselves, in a way. So I think it's great. I don't know what more you would like to do, but I'm happy to talk to you later.
That sounds great. Thank you. And it's great to connect accuracy with simplicity, so thanks.
Thank you. Just out of curiosity, do any of the communities also create like an analog version of, so they have all these technological, but an analog on the side?
That's a good question. So lots of the time, particularly, I'll speak more in the areas where I've worked personally, so I can speak more accurately on behalf of communities that I know really well. In this context, for example, in the Belize-Guatemalan border, what we first did is we drew a map of the village in the dirt on the ground, and then we took that into paper, and then we produced actually a textile version of it. but it doesn't have the opportunity to change it as much or to update it as much. When the river moves, it's really hard to then go and like re-sow those beads. But yes, that does happen sometimes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's really interesting and very timely, I think. I was just wondering about perhaps data security, because you were talking about mapping particular animals or woodland resources. I was just wondering, what if that data perhaps fell into the hands of someone who wants to misuse it?
Yes, that's a really good
Poachers or
question.
loggers.
So one of the big things that we try to make sure is that when people produce data that is anonymized, so that someone in particular is not going to receive any repercussions for recording the location of like a protected animal or a particular site, which some people have considered shouldn't be shared with outsiders. We not everyone in the group will always have access to all kinds of data. So it might be that some people physically can't access it, even if they had the opportunity to digitally access it, if that makes sense. Communities who maybe are not as digitally literate won't be thinking about the digital infrastructure that needs a different kind of security. So we've got various different servers where we store things securely, but communicating that to people whose first experience of a smartphone is you giving them a smartphone is much more complicated to explain. So we also make sure that we have lots of sort of password secure access. And then also, because not everyone has the resources to be able to charge these devices where the data is being stored, if it can't be charged, then it can't be accessed in that environment. So lots of the time where there's conflict in between rural groups, and you know one group doesn't have solar-powered opportunities to charge these devices, you have some reassurance that they are not going to be able to access this data once they stop being charged. But in terms of digital security, I would love to talk a lot more about that. I'm not sure if I have enough time right now, but I'd be very happy to afterwards if you'd like.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. So if anyone wants to ask any more questions, we can discuss more with Hannah in the coffee break.
Thank you.
Thank you again.